In the event of an attack on Allied territory, the NATO Alliance has the ability to deploy close to 1 million troops across 3 readiness tiers. That number is meant to act as a deterrent to any would-be aggression from East European neighbours while sending a message of reassurance to allies. However, a number on paper compared to actual troops on the ground are two very different things. This isn't just a big game of risk, after all. And so the question this video is asking is simple. How does NATO actually get those forces to where they are needed, and how much time is required? And so let's get to work and try to answer this question with a particular focus on logistics. And so we first need to understand the framework NATO has built since 2022, something known as the NATO Force Model. Back at the 2022 NATO summit in Madrid, members agreed to a new strategic concept, the first of its kind since 2010. In this document, Russia was named as the most significant and direct threat to Allied peace and safety. Another point of consensus stemming from that 2022 summit was the structural decision to replace the NRF, or NATO Response Force, with a new NATO Force Model, or NFM. What's the difference? Well, before we had the 40,000 troops of the NRF, which included 20,000 assigned to a very high readiness joint task force. Now the NATO Force Model is larger with different tiers of readiness. First, there's the ARF, or Allied Reaction Force, which calls for some 100,000 military personnel to be mobilized within 10 days to defend NATO territory. Another 200,000 additional troops are to be mission-ready after a maximum of 30 days, and then 500,000 more military personnel would be ready after no more than 6 months. Within this NFM framework, Germany alone has agreed to provide around 35,000 military personnel, as well as 200 ships and aircraft within the first 30 days to defend the alliance. Forces are not just earmarked as broadly available. Instead, they are pre-assigned to specific regional defense plans, specific sectors, and specific missions. As a result, a brigade knows its terrain before a crisis begins. But let's get into more detail regarding each tier of response. Tier 1 is the fastest to respond. These troops comprise the highest readiness forces NATO has, service members who are either already in theatre or able to move within 10 days of a decision. Troops in this tier include forward-stationed units along the eastern flank, the 8 NATO multinational forces located in Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, Slovakia, Hungary, Romania, and Bulgaria. Most are battle groups integrated into a brigade, while it's a full multinational brigade in Latvia. National Very High Readiness units are on standby in home garrisons, pre-assigned to specific sectors of the regional defense plans. Additionally, air policing and air shielding squadrons are already on rotation in the Baltics and Poland, and NATO's standing naval groups have been deployed since 2022. Germany's contribution for this tier is its 10 Panzer Division, with roughly 30,000 troops including its brigades and joint enabling forces. These were declared at initial operational capability in 2025. The main thing to remember here is that Tier 1 is not a reserve. Indeed, it's the force that fights while everyone else is packing and preparing to move out. Next is Tier 2, the reinforcements. This comprises around 200,000 troops able to get to the fight within 10 to 30 days. This grouping sees more mechanized and armored brigades, additional fighter wings, follow-on naval task groups. They're pre-assigned to regional plans but not at the same hair-trigger readiness as Tier 1. So when Tier 1 is committed and fighting, Tier 2 is flowing into theatre. For some critics, this is the most critically under-resourced tier. Indeed, analysts at NATO Defense College and the Center for Strategic and International Studies consistently flag that the regional plans require significant numbers of Tier 2 heavy units that Allied armies simply don't have in sufficient quantity at sufficient readiness, particularly armored brigades and combat aviation formations. Hopefully, this is being worked on. But next, let's take a look at Tier 3, NATO's surge element. Consisting of some 500,000 troops, this grouping has forces ready to fight within 30 to 180 days. This tier is all about mass mobilization, lower readiness brigades, divisions and corps, reservist-heavy national contingents. There would also be US-based reinforcement formations requiring transatlantic movement. This is where total national defense and wartime industrial production become relevant. Think US corps deploying from the continental United States, German and French reserve divisions activated, and Nordic and Baltic nations expanding their conscript-based forces. And yes, we recognize that 30 to 180 days is a long time, particularly if Tier 1 and Tier 2 haven't held the line. This is exactly why the first two tiers, and the race to deploy them, matters so much. Tier 3 generates the warfighting depth for a protracted conflict. So that's the structure set up by NATO. It's fairly clear and structured as long as each nation can manage their forces according to this framework. Unfortunately, reality is almost never that clean, particularly if you're looking at how Russia works. Modern conflict deliberately blurs the boundaries between war and peace. Before armed conflict, there may be hybrid activity, cyber probing, disinformation, and border incidents. This would be followed by significant military buildup, escalating hybrid attacks, and ambiguous intent. But after that is when you see kinetic military action and NATO Article 5 invoked. The problem is that if you wait until Article 5 is invoked to start your Tier 1 clock, your 10-day window may already be too late. Indeed, Russian planning assumes it can achieve its initial objectives before NATO's response force arrives. And so this might be what a realistic escalation ladder looks like. In weeks 1 and 2, a Russian/Belarusian exercise is announced near the Lithuanian border, with no declared end date. You'll see GPS spoofing in the Baltics and cyber attacks on Baltic government infrastructure. It's nothing that definitively crosses a legal threshold for military response, especially since these activities have happened from time to time. But then, in week 3, we'd perhaps see a NATO intelligence assessment that Russian forces could reach operational readiness for an offensive within 10 to 14 days. At this point, Article 4 consultations begin in Brussels and a heated debate in Allied capitals ensues. Is this coercion and harassment, probing, or is this the real thing? Therein lies the decision problem. Activating Tier 1 prematurely is expensive, it's politically risky, and, well, potentially escalatory. However, waiting too long means those 10 days on paper become 3 days in practice, after NATO has spent a week arguing about intent. The German operational planning community has a phrase which we'll try to say in the native language as best we can. Wir gehen, wenn wir müssen, und zwar so, wie wir sind. Which means we go when we must, and we go as we are. Yes, while it would be great to have an announced start date and time for an invasion, it's not often the case. In this situation of playing defense, the enemy makes the first moves. So once things get going, there's no time to reorganize, no time to restock. The unit that exists on the day of the decision is the unit that deploys. And why does this matter for everything that follows? Well, the logistics machine has to be preloaded. Supply chains, fuel contracts, rail slots, host nation support agreements, all of this has to be arranged in peacetime. There's simply no time to arrange it when the crisis begins. This brings us to the real challenge, not the political decision to deploy, but the physical problem of actually moving and sustaining tens of thousands of troops and thousands of vehicles across a continent. So why is moving an army across the European continent harder than it sounds? After all, there are motorways and railways everywhere, aren't there? There's a saying in military logistics: amateurs talk strategy, professionals talk logistics. Sure, NATO has the strategy, and sure, they are professionals, but the question is whether the alliance's commanders have the logistics to match. For us, there are 3 layers to this problem. The first problem is a movement problem. How do you physically move, for example, a German brigade to the NATO eastern flank in Lithuania? Next is staying supplied. Once that brigade arrives, how do you keep it in the fight? And third is surviving the journey. You see, there's a threat problem. In a contested environment, logistics formations are targets. So now we go into further detail on these three problems. Starting with the movement problem, Germany is Europe's logistics crossroads, but it also risks being Europe's bottleneck. Did you know that there's actually a dedicated Bundeswehr unit for the movement of Allied forces through German territory? It goes by the name Logistics Battalion 163, Delmenhorst, and it's specifically responsible for reception, staging and onward movement, or RSOM. The unit receives Allied forces at ports and railheads and feeds them into the Eastern Pipeline. With this in mind, there are three main west-to-east corridors, all heading to and then through Frankfurt-Oder before heading through Poland. First, Benelux, Rotterdam or Antwerp, to Ruhr, to Hanover, to Magdeburg, to Frankfurt-Oder. Second, Bremerhaven, to Hanover, to Magdeburg, to Frankfurt-Oder. And 3 is Hamburg to Berlin to Frankfurt-Oder. Now, a full brigade road march generates hundreds of vehicles. This includes combat vehicles, fuel tankers, supply trucks, field ambulances, engineering vehicles, and command vehicles. And at proper march spacing, a brigade column can stretch 50 to 80 kilometers on the road. The bottleneck and movement problem comes into play as the average speed of military vehicles is significantly slower than civilian traffic, and their movement requires road closures, bridge weight restrictions, and police escorts. Furthermore, Germany's Autobahn bridge network sees many structures having axle load and total weight restrictions that require route surveys and sometimes reinforcement before military convoys can pass. And so, if Germany's medium force brigade, Panzer Brigade 21, were to head to Kaunas, Lithuania, that's approximately 1,200 kilometers by road. Even with wheeled vehicles, which this brigade has, it's still a multi-day road march with enormous fuel, maintenance and coordination requirements. Indeed, fuel is itself a major consideration and potential problem. Contracts with Tank und Rast, Germany's motorway service operator for military convoy refueling, must be pre-arranged, and this is actually how the Bundeswehr plans to fuel a brigade-scale move through Germany. There's also transport by rail, although it has its limits. Rail is faster for bulk equipment and reduces road wear, and Germany has a capable military rail infrastructure, but there's a gauge problem for the time being. This exists at the Polish-Lithuanian border, where rail gauge changes from European standard to the Soviet-era wider gauge. As a result, equipment must be offloaded, transferred, and reloaded, presenting a major bottleneck. Sure, Rail Baltica, the new European gauge rail from Warsaw to Tallinn, is under construction, but it's not yet complete as a fully operational military route and has been subject to delays and funding shortages. Making things more precarious is that there's only one single existing railway that goes through the Suwalki Gap, a notable choke point most likely to be interdicted in a conflict, as Russian and Belarusian forces could sever this line in a matter of hours. The practical conclusion is that rail gets you to eastern Poland, road gets you through the Suwalki Gap. Note that you cannot ship personnel and equipment separately, as in past missions like Afghanistan or Mali, because if one mode is disrupted, the other is useless. And so one military analyst was quoted as describing rail through the Baltics as unsuitable for brigade-scale military transport. And then there's also the sea option. You could move forces from the port of Rostock through the Baltic Sea to Lithuanian/Latvian ports. This was actually practiced as part of exercise Quadriga 2025, with Rostock as the port of embarkation for the Bundeswehr's annual deployment exercise to Lithuania. What took place were significant loading and offloading times. We're talking days, not hours. The Baltic Sea is also contested, with Kaliningrad-based Iskander-M missiles, the Russian Baltic Fleet, and anti-ship capabilities implementing anti-access/area denial, or A2AD. And so the ship option is valuable as a logistics flow for sustainment, but not reliable as the primary route for the first reinforcing brigade that needs to arrive in 10 days. But then the movement problem has its own bureaucracy problem. Even without any of the physical constraints mentioned, moving military equipment across Europe involves a number of administrative hurdles. There are customs and border procedures in multiple nations. Diplomatic clearances are needed for air and sea movement. Host nation support agreements, which outline fuel, accommodation, maintenance support considerations, also need to be established, whether it's for Western European forces moving through Germany or German forces moving through Poland and to Lithuania. NATO's own assessment is that the political and bureaucratic friction in the movement pipeline remains one of the hardest problems to solve, because it requires political decisions, not just military ones. But now it's time to more closely examine the vulnerability that is the Suwalki corridor, also known as the Suwalki Gap. Whatever route is chosen, troops reinforcing Lithuania must pass through or around this corridor, a roughly 65-kilometer strip of land between the heavily militarized Russian exclave of Kaliningrad and Belarus. It is the only land connection between Lithuania and the rest of NATO. Passing through this gap is dangerous, as Russians from Kaliningrad have permanent line of sight over everything moving through this corridor. On top of this, Russia's Iskander-M ballistic missiles based in Kaliningrad have a range that covers the entire Baltic theatre. Every road, rail line, port and airfield from Warsaw to Tallinn is within reach. Belarusian and Russian forces positioned on either side could physically close the corridor in hours, and even if they don't close it militarily, the threat alone shapes every movement decision: convoy timing, spacing, air defense coverage requirements. And so the Suwalki Gap is not just a geographic feature, it is a strategic timer. Once it closes or credibly threatens to close, the reinforcement window snaps shut. With this in mind, this is the moment where the 10-day Tier 1 clock becomes a race, not against logistics timelines, against a decision in Moscow. But let's say that NATO forces get to the fight. With all the challenges we've already presented, that in itself is an impressive accomplishment. However, keeping these forces in the fight is a continuous operation. Sticking with our German examples, the Bundeswehr structures this through the Logistisches System der Bundeswehr, which has 3 interlocking phases. Phase 1, preparation. Before anyone moves, the entire supply chain must be preloaded, including ammo, fuel and spare parts. With this in mind, ramping up industrial capacity of spare parts and replacements and pre-existing, pre-positioned, sufficiently high stock levels are critical. However, it should be noted that Germany's post-Cold War drawdown gutted ammo stockpiles, while NATO's target is 30 days of high-intensity combat stocks. Germany, like most European allies, is well below this. Phase 2 is deployment/movement, the physical move of the brigade and its logistics tail. One critical thing to keep in mind about the logistics tail is that it's as large as the combat element, if not larger, and every breakdown is a supply chain event. Every fuel stop is a tactical decision. And finally, Phase 3 is operational sustainment. The brigade is in Lithuania. Supplies may be more than 1,000 kilometers away. So when the fight begins, the supply chain becomes the battle's lifeline. The sustainment model works in logistics levels, as you can see from this simple table. Key to all of this working together is what is known as a coupling bridge, a chain of mobile logistics nodes linking Germany to the operational area. Like a relay race, each echelon hands off to the next, creating an unbroken supply chain from factory to foxhole. Break any link in this chain and the fighting unit runs dry. Thus, every link must function simultaneously. Supply chain visibility is critical, but it's our understanding that NATO uses LogFast software for this. However, in reality, no echelon has a complete real-time picture of what is where, what is needed, and what is available. Commanders make decisions based on last known status, not current status, using Excel, pen, and paper. In a high-tempo environment, this gap between what the system says and what is actually on the ground risks lives and operational momentum. This is the systemic problem that ties everything together, and it is exactly why the IT and software dimension matters. So let's take everything we've learned thus far and apply it to a real-world scenario. Germany's Panzer Brigade 21 and the concept of mittlere Kräfte, or medium forces. Germany has spent the last 3 years fundamentally rethinking what kind of ground force it needs. The old model saw Cold War-era heavy divisions of Leopard 2 tanks fixed in garrison along the inner German border, waiting for a Soviet invasion that never came. You can imagine this model being quite slow to get to NATO's eastern flank. And then there's the new model, Germany's medium forces, with the 1st Brigade built in this new model being Panzer Brigade 21 Lippeland, a force of about 5,500 soldiers. This medium force brigade is a deliberate answer to the specific strategic challenge of NATO's northeastern flank. Heavy tracked brigades provide maximum firepower but are slow to deploy, as tracked vehicles cannot self-drive on public roads at highway speed. Instead, they require heavy equipment transporters or rail, adding days to any deployment. Light brigades, on the other hand, are fast to deploy but bring with them insufficient firepower for high-intensity armoured warfare. And so we have our medium forces, armoured vehicles which are deployable by road at speed with sufficient firepower for combined arms operations. The key platform of Panzer Brigade 21 is the GTK Boxer, and it can self-deploy on public roads at highway speed. In our scenario, the distance from Augustdorf to the Lithuanian border is approximately 1,200 kilometers, and this is achievable in a multi-day self-deployment without the rail or heavy equipment transported dependency of a tracked unit. Even artillery is highly mobile in the form of the RCH-155, a wheeled, self-propelled howitzer firing the same NATO standard 155mm ammunition as all Allied systems, but fully mobile on roads. Currently, reconnaissance is courtesy of the Fennec wheeled scout vehicle. Every capability decision in Panzer Brigade 21 traces back to the challenges we identified earlier. Indeed, the concept was explicitly designed so that Germany could respond to a Baltic crisis without being constrained by rail capacity and gauge changes. When it comes to sustainment of this force, the brigade supply battalion can establish Versorgungspunkte, or mobile logistics nodes, at logistics level 1, providing ammunition, fuel, rations and maintenance support on the move. The wheeled character of the brigade means the sustainment vehicles, also Boxer and wheeled trucks, can keep pace with the combat elements. With all of this in mind, this specific brigade is formally committed as a Tier 1 capable formation in Germany's NATO Force Model Declaration. Indeed, it has already conducted thousands of kilometers of road marching deployments to the Pabrade training area in Lithuania, validating the very logistics chain this video describes. But while Panzer Brigade 21 appears to be a pretty good solution to all of the movement/logistical challenges we put forward, some gaps remain. When it comes to personnel and readiness depth, the Bundeswehr's active force sits at approximately 180,000, well short of the 203,000 target. Germany suspended conscription in 2011, and so the reform debate is ongoing, but a trained manpower reserve is not yet available. And then a brigade at 5,500 troops on paper, and a brigade that can deploy these troops, trained, equipped and ready when the time comes, are different things. Yes, large-scale exercises will help with this, but the real world may present unexpected challenges. Earlier, we had also hinted at ammunition availability being a challenge due to insufficient stockpiles. And when it comes to logistics, the Bundeswehr's primary logistics software was designed for peacetime garrison operations and Afghanistan-style rotational deployments. This requires permanent network connectivity and may not be able to reliably function at logistics level 1. And so, in a war scenario, units will likely revert to radio and paper, losing all digital visibility of the supply chain. And then the aforementioned software used by NATO, LOGFAS, similarly degrades under contested electromagnetic conditions. The practical consequence of all this at the brigade level is that the commander of a brigade supply battalion loses real-time visibility of what their companies have, what is en route, and what has been consumed, and this lack of visibility infects the rest of the supply chain. Again, decisions are made on last known data, not current data. In a high-tempo fight, this is how units run dry. And finally, despite the EU's Military Mobility 2.0 initiative, crossing European borders with military equipment still involves significant bureaucratic and physical friction. Bridge weight limits, customs procedures, host nation permit requirements, In a real crisis, these frictions do not all disappear just because politicians have declared an emergency. And so, to conclude our very, very long video, let's bring it back to the big picture and review the NATO force model and how something like Panzer Brigade 21 fits into it all. While all of these preparations are designed to win a war after it starts, the real point is to make it obvious to an adversary that NATO can reinforce rapidly and sustainably enough that aggression is not worth attempting. The point of this video is to highlight that credible deterrence doesn't just require firepower and weapons, but it requires credible logistics to support operations. A Tier 1 brigade that cannot actually move in 10 days is not a Tier 1 brigade. It is a diplomatic fiction, and a sustainment network that breaks down at the Suwalki gap or runs dry after 5 days of high-intensity combat does not deter anyone. Software that goes dark in a contested electromagnetic environment is not a minor inconvenience, but is instead a strategic vulnerability. Germany's investment in Panzer Brigade 21 and its medium forces concept, its wheeled platforms, organic sustainment, deployments to Lithuania and readiness validation are all direct answers to providing credible deterrence. Of course, it is but one brigade in one division in one nation's army, and so the broader challenge for Germany and for NATO is building an alliance-wide logistics machine that is credible at scale, mobile enough, stocked enough, digitally connected enough, and resilient enough to function inside a kill web. 800,000 troops on paper is a number, but 800,000 troops who can move, be sustained, and survive in a contested environment, that is deterrence. The gap between those two things is what everyone in NATO is racing to close. We've covered a lot in this video, but what are your thoughts on getting faraway forces to the eastern flank and sustaining them? Let us know by leaving a comment.